Their mother's body was still warm when 9-year-old Clara made the hardest decision of her life. She wrapped her 7-year-old sister in every piece of clothing they owned, took her hand, and walked straight into a blizzard. 5 miles to town, no food, no money, no one waiting for them. By the 3rd mile, Elise collapsed. Clara carried her until her legs gave out. The snow was falling so thick she couldn't see her own hands. That's when she spotted the barn. Inside they found hay, warmth, and a chance to survive the night. But what Clara didn't know was that the man who owned that barn had buried his own daughter 5 years ago. And he'd spent every day since making sure he never cared about anyone again. When Thomas Hale found 2 frozen children in his hay, he had a choice: send them back into the storm, or break the promise he made to his own broken heart. This story reminds us that the people who save us aren't always the ones we expect, and sometimes the ones we save end up saving us right back. If you've ever found family in the most unexpected place, this one will hit different. Smash that like button. Tell me in the comments, would you have opened your door? And subscribe so you never miss another story about second chances and the courage to love again. The wind howled down from the mountains, mean and alive, with snow so sharp it would slice your skin. That was the kind of cold that Montana folks feared more than any wolf. And 9-year-old Clara Brennan knew that cold all too well. She had felt it creep into their little shack for 3 straight nights. She felt it when she touched her mama's face, and it was already gone. At 9 years old, Clara knew what death was. Her little sister Elise, who was only 7, did not quite get it. Elise was a tiny thing with their mama's dark hair and the wide eyes of a father they could not even remember. "Is Mama just sleeping?" Elise asked, her voice just a whisper in the dim light. Clara gently pulled the thin quilt over their mother's still face. "Yeah, honey," she lied. "She is just sleeping." But Elise had seen Mama get weaker every day. She saw the fever and heard the awful coughing. She knew her mama was not coming back. "She is not gonna wake up, is she?" Elise whispered. Clara hugged her little sister tight. They huddled under the one blanket they had left. Everything else, the other blankets, Mama's wedding ring, even the skillet, had been sold for food money that ran out weeks ago. "No," Clara finally said, telling her the hard truth. They stayed in that cold shack until noon, unsure what to do next. Clara figured she ought to tell someone, but who? Their closest neighbor, Mrs. Hutchkins, lived 2 miles away and had already turned them down for food last week. "I have got my own to feed," she had said, plain and simple. It was not like Mama chose to be poor or sick. The town of Greystone was a 5-mile walk, and the weather was terrible. That same storm had trapped them for 3 days while their mama faded away. Looking at the snow piling up, Clara made a choice no child should have to make. "We have to leave," she told Elise. "Where to?" Elise asked. Clara did not know. "Town," she said. Anywhere was better than staying in that shack with no food, no fire, and their mama lying still. They just had to go. They put on every piece of clothing they owned. They wore dresses on top of dresses and wrapped themselves in Mama's old shawl. Clara took one last look at the bed, then took Elise's hand, and they stepped out into the blizzard. The first mile was not too bad. The wind was not biting so hard down in the valley. To keep their spirits up, Clara got Elise talking. "Remember Mama's apple cake?" Elise said, her breath making little white clouds. Clara smiled. For her birthday, Mama had traded sewing for apples and sugar. She spent all afternoon making a lopsided cake that was burnt on one side, but she was so proud. "It was the best cake I ever had," Clara said, and she meant it. It was not about the cake. It was about the love that went into it. That memory reminded Clara of her Mama's last words the night before she passed. Mama had grabbed her hand and whispered, "You have got to be strong now. Stronger than any little girl should have to be. You take care of your sister." "You will get better, Mama," Clara had pleaded. But Mama just shook her head. "Promise me," she had said, her voice weak. "Promise you will look after Elise. Do not you let anyone separate you two." Clara did not understand. Who would do that? Mama's eyes were almost closed. "People. They will try to put you in different homes. You all stay together, no matter what." Clara had promised with all her heart. Now, trudging through the deepening snow, she wondered how on earth she could keep that promise. The second mile was much harder. The road climbed up, and the wind hit them with everything it had. The snow was flying sideways now, stinging their faces. Elise could not keep up. "I am tired," she cried. "I know," Clara said. "Just a little more." "What is in town?" Elise asked. Clara hoped for help. She prayed someone would give them food and a warm place to sleep. But she feared the town would be full of people like Mrs. Hutchkins, folks with their own problems who could not take on two more. By the third mile, Elise just stopped, shivering and crying in the road. Clara knew they would die right there if she did not act. "Get on my back," she said, kneeling down. Elise was light as a feather from not eating. But after a short while, Clara's legs felt like jelly. She could not carry her sister the last 2 miles to town. The sun was going down and the world was turning dark. Night was falling fast. Have you ever felt a cold so deep it settled right in your bones? A cold that promised the worst was yet to come? That was the world for young Clara, trying to be the rock her little sister Elise needed after their mama had passed. But that Texas wind was howling something fierce, and a real panic began to grab hold of her heart. They were out of time. They were going to be found in the spring, 2 little girls frozen together on the road. This story is about finding a light in the darkest place, so listen close. Just when all hope seemed lost, Clara spotted it through the blinding snow, a big old barn set way back from the road. "Come on," she urged, pulling her sister toward that dark shape. It was not a warm house, but it was a chance. With one hand, she fought the heavy door open, and they stumbled into the quiet dark, the air thick with the smell of hay and animals. A horse nickered somewhere in the shadows, and Clara whispered, "It is okay," as much for herself as for the horse. She found a stack of hay bales in the back and started pulling them down, trying to make a small nest against the cold. Elise, her voice just a tiny thing, asked, "Are we supposed to be in here?" Clara pulled her sister in close, wrapping their mama's old shawl around them both. They were shivering something awful. "I do not know," Clara finally said, "but there was nowhere else. What if the farmer who owned the barn got angry? What if he sent them back out into that storm?" "He will not," Clara insisted, trying to sound sure. "Folks are good. They will help us." So they huddled together in their makeshift bed. They listened to the wind rage outside and the soft shifting of the animals inside. Clara did not mean to fall asleep. She meant to stand guard. But a deep weariness took hold, and she drifted off. She dreamed of her mama back when she was healthy and singing sweet lullabies. The memory was so real that Clara cried in her sleep. She woke with a start to the sound of heavy boots on the wood floor. A man, tall and broad, was walking straight toward them, holding a lantern that cut through the darkness. Her heart pounded in her chest. The light fell on their faces, and Clara looked up at a stranger. He looked old to her 9-year-old eyes, with a hard, weathered face that had seen too many rough seasons. He was probably only in his 30s. He stared down at them, his expression as blank as the winter landscape. "Who are you?" His voice was low and gravelly. Clara scrambled up, putting herself in front of Elise. "I am sorry, sir," she rushed to say. "We were just so cold." "I asked for your name, not your reason," he cut her off. "I am Clara Brennan. This is my sister, Elise. Our mama was Catherine Brennan." "I know the Brennan place," the man said. "Where is your mother?" The question hung in the air. Clara's voice broke as she answered, "Our mama passed on this morning. We do not have anywhere to go." The man just stood there, his face giving nothing away. "You got any other family?" No, sir. The town is that way, he said, nodding down the road. About 4 miles. The preacher there will know what to do with you. He was sending them back out to freeze. Please, Clara begged, hating how small she sounded. It is too far. Elise is only 7. That is not my problem, he said, and the words hit her like a slap in the face. Clara felt Elise begin to cry behind her. I understand, Clara whispered, turning to help her sister. They would try to make it, even if she knew they could not. Hold on, the man said. Something in his face had changed. It was not soft, but it was less hard. When did your mother pass? This morning, sir, right after the sun came up. And you have been walking all day, in this? Yes, sir. We did not know what else to do. He stood there for a long time, and the only sound was the wind screaming outside. Finally, he let out a long, heavy sigh. All right, come on, he said, turning back toward the door he came through. To the house? Clara asked, not daring to believe it. You cannot stay in here. You will freeze solid. But you said— I know what I said, he interrupted, looking back at them. In the lantern light, she saw a flicker of something in his eyes, something that looked like decency. I am saying something else now. Are you coming or not? Clara grabbed Elise's hand and followed him without another word. The house was small and simple, with a big fireplace in the main room. He told them to sit by the hearth and added more wood to the fire until a wonderful warmth filled the room. He brought them thick, heavy blankets and cups of water. They drank so fast it made their throats ache. Then he looked at them with those serious eyes and asked, When was the last time you girls had a real meal? It had been a long, hard spell of cold, hunger, and waiting. I don't recall, she finally said, her voice barely a whisper. The man, Thomas, went on into the kitchen. Clara heard him moving about, the clank of a dish, the thud of a knife on wood. He came back with a plate holding bread and a slice of cheese. It was not much, but it was a feast to her eyes. Eat this slow, he said, putting the plate on the bench. You'll get sick if you eat too fast on an empty stomach. Clara wanted to wolf it all down, but she made herself and Elise take tiny bites. The bread was a bit stale and the cheese was hard, but it tasted like the finest meal she had ever had. Thomas watched them for a moment, then turned to stare into the fireplace. Name's Thomas Hale, he said to the flames. This here's my place, the barn, this house, and about 200 acres of land, mostly good for nothing but grazing. Clara swallowed her mouthful. Thank you for helping us, Mr. Hale. Haven't decided if I'm helping you just yet. His words should have scared her, but she was too tired and full to feel much of anything. Yes, sir. Thomas turned and looked square at them. Tell me about your mother. And so Clara did. She told him how their mama got sick with a fever and a terrible cough, getting weaker each day until she could not even sit up. Clara spoke of selling off every last thing they owned and how the neighbors had shut their doors on them. She told him about the morning she woke up and just knew her mama was gone for good. She did not cry. Crying had not fixed anything before, and it would not start now. Thomas listened without a word, his face like stone. When she finished, the room was quiet. And your father? He finally asked. He left when Elise was just a baby. Mama said he went off to find work. Clara just shrugged. Mama never knew if he abandoned us or if he died. She liked to think he died, but he probably just left. The fire crackled and popped. Outside, the wind howled something fierce, but inside, Clara felt warm for the first time in what felt like forever. Y'all can stay the night, Thomas said suddenly. I'll take you to the preacher in town come morning. He'll know what to do with you. What's he gonna do? Elise asked, her first words since they had arrived. Thomas looked at the little one, and his hard expression softened just a touch. Find you a family, I reckon. Someone to take you in. Together? Clara asked, her voice sharp with worry. They'll keep us together, right? I don't know. Clara felt Elise's small hand find hers under the blanket, squeezing tight. "We have to stay together," Clara insisted. "We promised Mama." Sometimes promises can't be kept. "This one has to be," she said, her chin set. Thomas turned back to the fire. "Get some sleep. The bedroom's through that door. Y'all can take the bed." "We can sleep out here, sir," Clara said quickly. "We don't want to be no trouble." "I said take the bed." His tone made it clear there was no room to argue. Clara helped Elise up, and they went into the small, plain bedroom. There was just a bed, a dresser, and one window. But the bed had a real mattress and pillows, and the sheets smelled fresh and clean. When they crawled in, Elise let out a little sigh of relief. "Clara," she whispered in the dark, "is he a good man?" Clara thought about his hard eyes and his gruff voice. But then she thought about the warm blankets, the food, and this soft bed. "I don't know," she answered honestly. "But we're safe for tonight." "What about tomorrow?" Elise's voice trembled. "I don't know that either." After a moment, Elise whispered, "I miss Mama." Clara pulled her sister close, the tears she had held back finally starting to fall. "Me too." In the other room, Thomas Hale stared into the fire. He meant what he said. He would take the girls to town, hand them over to folks who knew how to handle orphans. It was not his problem. He owed these girls nothing more than a roof over their heads for one night. But he could not shake the image of Clara's face when he first found them. She was not just scared. She looked resigned, like she expected him to send them right back out into the storm. It was the same look his own daughter had given him 5 years ago, right before. He cut the thought off, standing up to pace the floor. He had spent 5 long years building walls around that memory, and he was not about to tear them down for 2 strays. They were going to town in the morning. That was the end of it. But when he finally laid down on the hard bench, the blanket he used still smelled a little like lavender, the way Elizabeth's things used to. He pushed that thought away, too. When sleep finally came, it was filled with the sound of small voices asking questions he could not answer. Morning arrived quiet and still. Thomas woke up with an aching back from the bench. For a second, he forgot about the girls. Then he heard them, soft whispers coming from the bedroom. "Should we wake him up?" "I don't know. What if he's mad we're still here?" Thomas sat up, rubbing the sleep from his face. He felt stiff and old, even though he was barely 40. He walked to the bedroom door and saw them through the crack. They were sitting on the edge of the bed, their hair a mess, and their faces still smudged with dirt. Clara saw him and sat up straight, her hand going to her sister's shoulder. "We're ready to go to town whenever you are, sir," she said. Thomas pushed the door open. "Y'all eat breakfast first. We don't want to be a bother." "Too late for that," he grumbled. But there was no real anger in his voice. He made them some porridge, just plain oats and water. But he stirred in a spoonful of precious honey and saw both their eyes go wide at the sweet taste. They ate slowly, like he had told them, but he could see the hunger fighting them for every single bite. While they ate, he hitched up his horse and wagon for the 4-mile trip to town. The plan was simple. Drop the girls with Reverend Michaels, maybe give the man a few dollars for their care, and then head back home to his quiet life. But when he went back inside, he found Clara at the basin washing the dishes. She had her sleeves rolled up and was scrubbing away at the bowls and the pot he had used. "You don't have to do that," he said. Clara kept washing. "Mama always said to clean up after yourself. Said it's the least you can do when someone shows you a kindness." Elise was standing nearby, wanting to help but not sure how. When she saw Thomas, she took a step back. "I swept the floor in the bedroom," she offered in a tiny voice. Thomas looked from one girl to the other and felt an unfamiliar ache in his chest. They were trying to earn their keep, to prove they were not a burden. It reminded him of someone else. He pushed the thought away. "Finish up," he said, his voice gruff. "We're leaving in 10 minutes. The ride to Greystone was quiet, with just the sound of the wagon wheels crunching in the snow. He had wrapped the girls in blankets, and they huddled close in the back of the wagon. They didn't say a word, just held on to each other while the world outside blurred past. Thomas stared straight ahead at the road, but he felt them back there, a heavy weight on his conscience. He was taking them toward a future he couldn't see, leaving them with a preacher who, while kind, would have to be practical. The man would find them homes if he could, or ship them off to some orphanage where they would be split up and lost to the world. Thomas told himself it was not his problem. Through the trees, the town of Greystone appeared, just a few buildings scattered across the valley. A main street held a general store, a saloon, and a blacksmith. At the very end of the street was a little white church with a steeple leaning just a bit, like it had been fighting the wind for years and was getting tired. Thomas pulled the wagon to a stop and hopped down. The girls stayed put. "Come on," he said gently. Claire got out, then helped her little sister Elise. They looked so small standing there in the snow, and that tight feeling returned to Thomas's chest. He led them up the steps. He knocked on the church door. A moment later, it creaked open, and Reverend Michaels stood there. He was a skinny man in his 50s with kind, worried eyes. The Reverend's eyebrows shot up. "Thomas Hale, I cannot say I have seen you in this church for a very long time. I am not here for a sermon, Reverend." The preacher's eyes drifted down to the two little girls hiding behind Thomas. "And who are these two young ladies?" "This is Clara and Elise Brennan. Their mother passed on yesterday. They have no other family and nowhere else to go. I figured you would know what to do." The concern on the Reverend's face was immediate. "Catherine Brennan. She is gone. She passed yesterday morning, from what the girls told me. The poor dears." The preacher knelt to their level. "Clara, Elise, I am so very sorry. Your mother was a fine woman. Please, you must come inside out of the cold." He ushered them all into the church. Thomas followed, feeling like he was trespassing. It had been 5 years since he had been inside these walls. "You did the right thing, bringing them to me," the Reverend said. "I just wish I knew what we could do. This territory is not well equipped for orphaned children." "There is an orphanage over in Helena," Thomas offered. "Yes, but," the Reverend paused. "That is a hard place. It is overcrowded, has little money, and the girls would be separated. They have different buildings for different ages." Clara's little hand shot out and grabbed her sister's tight. "We cannot be separated. We promised our mama. I understand that, dear. But sometimes things happen." "No." Clara's voice was firm, with a strength that sounded too old for a child. "We stay together. That is the only way." Reverend Michaels gave Thomas a helpless look. "Maybe a family here in town could take them both in. The Hendersons just lost their daughter. Perhaps they would welcome." "The Hendersons can hardly feed the children they already have," Thomas cut in. "What about the Pratts? They packed up and left for Oregon last month. The Williams family, then?" Thomas just shook his head. For every name the Reverend brought up, Thomas knew why it would not work. Too poor, too many kids, too old, or just not willing to take on another burden. He knew these folks and their struggles. Charity was a luxury none of them could afford. The Reverend let out a long sigh. "Then I am afraid Helena is the only choice we have. I can write a letter to arrange it." "They are not going to Helena," Thomas heard himself say. Everyone just stared at him. The Reverend looked shocked, but Clara's eyes filled with a desperate hope. "I am sorry?" the Reverend asked. The words had just tumbled out of his mouth, coming from a place deeper than thought. "I said they are not going to Helena. They are staying with me. Thomas, that is a kind offer. But you must realize, a single man with 2 young girls. People will talk. To hell with what people say." The Reverend winced at the curse word inside his church. "Still, there are certain standards. Are you telling me folks will gossip more about me giving 2 orphans a roof over their heads than they would about sending them to be forgotten in some crowded institution? It is not about what I think. It is about what this community believes is proper." "The community," Thomas said flatly, "has done nothing for these girls. From the looks of it, they have been starving for weeks, and not a single person lifted a finger to help. So, I do not much care what the community thinks." Reverend Michaels looked like he wanted to argue, but then he just closed his mouth. How long do you plan on keeping them? Thomas had not thought about that. He was running on pure instinct now, an instinct that felt like anger. It was a recognition that these girls had been let down by everyone just like he had been. As long as it takes, he said. Claire was looking at him, and her expression was not one of gratitude. It was more like a mix of suspicion and a tiny bit of hope. Mr. Hale, she said softly, you do not have to do this. We can go to Helena. We will find a way. I know you will, Thomas said, and he meant every word. This little girl was a survivor, but you should not have to. Elise pulled on her sister's sleeve. Does this mean we get to stay in the warm house? Clara kept her eyes locked on Thomas's face, searching for an answer. I do not understand, Mr. Hale. Why are you doing this? It was a good question. Thomas wished he had a better answer. Because someone ought to, he said finally, and no one else is stepping up. The Reverend cleared his throat. Well, if you are sure about this, Thomas, I suppose I will not stop you. But maybe I should check in on them each week, just to make sure they are cared for. You do that, Thomas agreed. Check in all you want. But they are coming home with me now. Home. The word felt foreign on his tongue. He had not considered his ranch a home in a long, long time. It was just a place to work and to be, but these girls needed a home, and he had a house. And that simple math added up to a decision that scared him to his bones. They left. Thomas left that church with Reverend Michael still fussing about doing things the right way. He helped the girls clamber back into the wagon, and as they rolled away, a tiny voice came from the back. Thank you. Thomas did not answer. He could not trust the words to come out right, not with the storm of feelings brewing in his chest. He just clicked his tongue at the horse and pointed them toward home. That first week was a lesson in walking on eggshells. The girls drifted through the house like little ghosts, trying their best to take up no space at all. They whispered when they had to talk and jumped at any loud noise. Thomas gave them his bedroom and took to sleeping on a hard wooden bench. He laid out the new rules of their life: water from the pump, the outhouse in the back, and firewood stacked by the house. They would have breakfast when the sun came up and supper when it went down. It was not much, but it was solid. Clara, the older sister, turned out to be tougher than a $2 steak. At only 9 years old, she could cook simple food and mend clothes, handling chores Thomas had let slide for years. She worked with a fire in her eyes, as if trying to earn her keep. Elise, the little one, was more delicate. Thomas would hear her crying softly at night through the thin bedroom door. Clara would quiet her with soft words, likely singing the same songs their mother used to sing. In the daylight, Elise stuck to her sister's side like a shadow, as if Clara was the only thing holding her world together. Thomas tried to keep his distance but also stay near. He showed them how to feed the chickens and gather eggs. He taught them how to brush the horse and check his hooves for rocks. These were small, useful things, bits of work to fill the heavy silence. On the third day, Clara found him mending a fence. Mr. Hale, she said. He looked up. What is it? She twisted her hands. I was wondering if we could go back to our old shack, the one where we lived with Mama. Thomas put his hammer down. What for? We left some things behind, she explained. There is a picture of Mama and Papa, and Elise has a doll Mama made for her. I know it is not much, but it means the world to us. We will go tomorrow, Thomas said, cutting her off. The relief that washed over Clara's face was plain as day. The next morning they rode the wagon to the shack. It was a pitiful sight. A heap of wood that looked like the next strong wind would carry it away. He had passed it 100 times and never gave it a second thought. Seeing it now, knowing those girls called it home, stirred a hot anger in his gut. Clara led them inside a single room, maybe 12 feet by 12 feet, with a dirt floor and a stove made of scrap. And there was the bed, a thin mattress on a frame, where Catherine Brennan still lay. Someone, probably Mrs. Hutchkins from down the way, had already prepared the body for burial. Her hands were folded and her face looked peaceful. The winter cold had turned the little shack into a tomb. Elise paid the bed no mind. She went right to a corner and snatched up a small cloth doll, clutching it to her chest like a lost treasure. To her chest. Thomas looked at the hard, frozen ground. "We ought to give her a proper burial," he said. Clara shook her head. "The ground is too hard. We tried digging before." Thomas just nodded. "I have tools. We will get it done." It took the better part of the day, but they managed. While Thomas worked the shovel, the girls gathered a few precious things. There was the photograph, the old doll, some clothes that were not worn clean through, and a small wooden box filled with letters. Once the grave was deep enough, Thomas wrapped Catherine Brennan in the quilt and laid her down gently. Clara and Elise stood beside the grave, holding hands tight. No tears fell, which somehow felt sadder. "Should we say a prayer or something?" Elise whispered. Clara glanced at Thomas, who just shook his head. "I am not one for speeches. If you have words to say, you should say them." Clara was quiet for a long moment. Finally, she spoke. "Mama, we are all right. We found a safe place, a warm place. You do not have to worry anymore. We will look after each other, just like you told us to. We promise." Her words were simple, but true. Thomas filled the grave as the girls watched. When he finished, Clara set a smooth stone at the head for a marker. It was more than their mother would have had otherwise. That night at supper, Clara started talking about their mother's last days. "She was scared," Clara said, poking at the food on her plate. "At the end, she tried to hide it, but I could tell." Thomas stayed quiet, not knowing what to say. "She kept saying she was sorry," Clara's voice trembled. "Sorry she could not take better care of us. Sorry we would have to be on our own. Sorry for leaving." "It was not her fault," Thomas said, his voice firm. "Your mother did the best she could." But was it enough? The question hung in the room like smoke. Thomas pictured Catherine Brennan in that cold shack, her daughters having to walk through a blizzard. He thought of that old photograph, of two young people smiling at a future they never got. "She kept you alive," he said at last. "She kept you together. That is more than enough." Clara looked at him with eyes that seemed far too old for her face. "Mr. Hale, did you ever have children?" The question struck him like a punch to the gut. His throat went tight. "Once," he managed to say. "What happened to them?" Elise whispered, sensing the change in the air. "Maybe we should not ask." "It is all right," Thomas said, even though it was not. "I had a daughter, Sarah. She passed away 5 years ago. She was only 6. The silence that followed was heavy and complete. "I am so sorry," Clara said softly. Thomas pushed his chair back and stood up fast. "Finish your supper, then get to bed." He walked out into the cold night. He needed the air, the distance, anything to escape the pity in their eyes. He stood in the yard, staring at the dark mountains, letting the cold seep deep into his bones until he felt numb. When he went back inside, the girls had already cleaned up and gone to their room. He could hear their quiet voices through the door. "Do you think he's mad at us?" Elise asked. "No," Clara answered. "I think he's just sad because we reminded him of his daughter. Or maybe he is sad all the time, and we just made him remember why." Thomas turned away, a tightness in his chest. Children sometimes speak the plainest truths. He had been sad all the time for 5 long years. The girls did not cause the sadness, they just uncovered it. The days settled into a strange but steady rhythm. Thomas found himself getting used to having the girls around. He bought some fabrics in town so Clara could sew new dresses. He taught them how to set snares for rabbits and how to check them. On clear nights, he pointed out the constellations in the starry sky. These were small, quiet moments, but they started to feel like a life instead of just surviving. Reverend Michaels came by every week, always with a worried look on his face. He asked about sleeping arrangements and proper supervision. Thomas gave him short, honest answers. The girls had the bedroom. He slept in the main room. They were fed, clothed, and warm. If that was not proper enough for the good Reverend, he could take it up with someone else. The Reverend never pushed it. Thomas figured he was just glad the problem of 2 orphan girls was solved without the town having to do much. One Sunday morning, Clara came to Thomas while he was feeding the chickens. "Mr. Hale, would it be all right if Elise and I went to church?" Thomas threw the feed a little harder than he needed to. "Why?" "Mama used to take us. I just thought it might be nice to do something normal." The word normal echoed in his mind. These girls who had lost everything were looking for something normal while living with a stranger who barely spoke. "I do not go to church," he said flatly. "I know. But we could go by ourselves. The Reverend said he would walk us back." Thomas wanted to say no. He hated the idea of people staring, asking questions, and judging him. But then he saw the hope in Clara's face. "Fine," he sighed, "but you stay together and you come straight home after." So every Sunday, the girls went to church, and Thomas stayed home, finding work to keep his hands busy. He tried not to think about the last time he sat in a church, back when he still believed in something more than just how hard life was. It was after one of those Sundays that things took a turn. The girls came home late, and Clara's face was red with anger while Elise cried softly. "What happened?" Thomas asked. Clara's jaw was set. "Some of the ladies at church were talking. They thought we could not hear them." "What were they saying?" Thomas felt a slow anger begin to build. "That it is not right, us living here with you. That you are just a bitter old man who knows nothing about raising children. That we would end up wild and godless." "And what did you say to them?" he asked. "Nothing. Mama taught us not to talk back to our elders," Clara said. She paused, then looked right at him. "But they are wrong, Mr. Hale. You have been kinder to us than anyone. You gave us a home. That is not godless. That is—" She searched for the right words. "That is what people who truly believe in God are supposed to do." Something inside Thomas cracked just a little. He had expected the town to judge him. He had been ready for it. What he had not expected was this fierce loyalty from a little girl. "Do not you worry about what they say," he told her, his voice rough. "Words cannot hurt you." "They can if you let them," Clara said, looking at him with that steady gaze of hers. "You let them hurt you. The words people said after your daughter died. I can tell." Thomas turned away and pretended to be busy. "You do not know what you are talking about." "Maybe not," she said. "But I know how it looks when someone is hurting and has not healed. Mama looked that way after Papa left, like a piece of her was gone forever." "Clara," Elise said gently, "we should go inside." But Clara was not done. "I just wanted you to know that we are grateful, and we do not care what those women say. You are a good man, Mr. Hale, whether you believe it or not." She took her sister's hand and led her into the house. Thomas was left standing alone in the yard, feeling as if she had seen straight through him. That night, long after the girls were asleep, Thomas sat by the fire, thinking. For the first time in a long while, he let himself think about Sarah. Not the usual way, pushing the memories down deep. No, he remembered her laugh, big and bright enough to fill a room. He remembered her endless questions and how she'd dog his heels around the ranch, wanting to be just like her papa. Then came the fever, hot and fast. He saw her confused eyes begging him to fix it, to do what a father was supposed to do. He remembered his wife Elizabeth holding their girl as her light went out. The sound that tore from Elizabeth's throat wasn't a scream. It was just pure, raw grief. After that, she was a ghost in their own home until the morning he found the note. She was sorry, but she couldn't stay with all the memories. He just let her go. What else was there to do? They were both drowning, and neither had the strength to pull the other out. Now, 5 years later, in that same quiet house, 2 new little girls were sleeping in what used to be Sarah's room. He woke up to the smell of real coffee. Clara stood at the stove, looking proud. "Found it tucked away in the cupboard," she said. "Figured you could use a real cup." He took the mug she offered. It was strong enough to float a horseshoe, but it was coffee. "Much obliged," he told her. Clara gave him a real smile, the first one he'd ever seen from her. "You're welcome." It was just a small thing. But sitting there, drinking coffee made by an orphan girl trying to find her way, Thomas felt a tiny crack in the ice that had frozen him solid for years. Outside, the sun was coming up over the hills, painting the snow pink and gold. For the first time in 5 years, Thomas reckoned he might just make it to spring. That peace lasted all of 6 weeks before the whispers started. The gossip that began in the church pews soon turned into righteous, meddling concern. The change was obvious the next time he went to town for supplies. When Thomas walked into the general store, the usual chatter about the weather and cattle stopped cold. Every eye in the place turned on him, filled with judgment. "Morning, Thomas," said Bill Crawford, the store owner, his voice a little too careful. Thomas put his list on the counter. "Bill, I need these things when you get a minute." Bill looked at the list, then back at Thomas. "Heard you've got the Brennan girls staying with you now." "That is right," Thomas said. "Folks are talking," Bill went on. "A single man, 2 young girls. It is about how things look." "Let them talk," Thomas said, his voice low. "Now, I'm not trying to stir up trouble," Bill said, shifting his weight. "I'm just saying it might be better if things were more official. The Reverend checks on us every week. Is that official enough for them?" Bill just looked uncomfortable. "It is not about what is happening, Thomas. It is about appearances. You have to see how it looks." "I see it just fine," Thomas said, his voice cold as a wellstone. "I see 2 kids who needed a hand, and nobody offered one but me. The same folks so worried about appearances didn't seem to give a damn when those girls were close to starving. Now that ain't entirely fair." Thomas grabbed his supply list. "You know what? I'll take my business somewhere else." As he turned to go, the storekeeper called out, "Thomas, hold on. There's a town meeting Tuesday night about the girls. I figured you ought to know." Thomas stopped, his hand on the door. "A meeting about what?" "About whether it's a suitable home for 'em." The words just hung there. Thomas turned back slow. "And who called this meeting?" "Margaret Whitmore and some of the other church ladies. They got the mayor involved. They're even bringing in someone from the Territorial Welfare Office." Margaret Whitmore. Thomas knew the type. A woman who wore her charity like a prize ribbon. She'd buried a son and a husband, and now she aimed to control everyone else's lives. "You tell Mrs. Whitmore and the mayor that those girls are staying right where they are. There's nothing to discuss." "You should still go, Thomas. Defend yourself. If you don't, they'll make the decision without you." Thomas left without another word, a hot anger boiling up inside him. He pushed his horse too hard on the ride home, driven by a fury that was part injustice and part helplessness. He found Clara and Elise in the yard, with Clara showing her little sister how to plant the spring garden. Clara's smile vanished when she saw the look on his face. "What is it?" she asked. Thomas swung down from the wagon, trying to wipe the thunder from his brow. "Nothing for you to worry about. But that girl saw too much. Something happened in town, I can tell." "Is it about us? Did somebody say something?" He looked at her. This child who'd already learned the world wasn't a kind place, and he couldn't bring himself to lie. "There's a meeting on Tuesday. Some folks think they have the right to decide what's best for you." "What kind of meeting?" "The kind where busybodies meddle in things that are none of their business." Elise stood frozen, clutching her little trowel. "Are they going to send us away?" "No," Thomas said, his voice firm as oak. "They are not." "But what if they try?" "Then they'll have to get through me first." Clara looked him square in the eye for a long moment, then gave a slow nod. "All right. We trust you." That simple trust hit him harder than any accusation ever could. Tuesday showed up too fast. Thomas told the girls to stay inside and lock the doors behind him. He rode into town as the sun was setting, bleeding red and orange across the sky like a bad omen. The meeting was in the church, of course. The place was more packed than he'd seen it for Sunday service in years. Looked like the whole town had turned out for the show. Up at the front stood Margaret Whitmore, dressed in black silk that cost more than a good horse. Next to her was Mayor Ernest Dalton, a man who got the job because nobody else wanted it. And beside them was a skinny fella in traveling clothes, all spectacles and self-importance. The Reverend Michael stood off to the side, looking troubled. He gave Thomas a small nod, but it was hard to tell if it was for support or sympathy. "Ah, Mr. Hale," Margaret Whitmore's voice rang out. "How good of you to grace us with your presence." Thomas didn't bother to find a seat. He just stood in the aisle, crossed his arms, and waited. Mayor Dalton cleared his throat. "Thomas, we're here to talk about the living situation with Clara and Elise Brennan. This is Mr. Howard Pembroke from the Territorial Welfare Office. He's here to, assess things." "Assess things?" Thomas repeated, his voice flat. "These children aren't your concern. They are the concern of this whole community," Margaret cut in. "Two girls living without a woman's guidance, in a home that, forgive me for being blunt, has an unsavory look to it." "Unsavory," Thomas said, his voice quiet and dangerous. "I've given those girls a roof over their heads, food in their bellies, and a safe place to sleep. What part of that is unsavory?" Mr. Pembroke stepped forward, pushing his glasses up his nose. "Mr. Hale, I'm sure your intentions are good, but you have to understand. The office has rules for placing orphans. A single man is just not considered suitable." "Suitable to who, you? Some paper pusher in the Capitol who wouldn't know these girls from Adam?" "Please, let's keep this civil," the mayor mumbled. "Civil?" Thomas looked around the room at all those watching faces. "You want civil? Where was this town when those girls were starving? Where were all of you good people when their mother was dying and they had nothing to eat and no wood for a fire?" The crowd was silent. A few folks had the good sense to look ashamed. Margaret held her head high. "We did not know how bad things were for them." "You did not want to know," Thomas shot back. "That shack they lived in is not 5 miles from here. People rode past it every single day. You all knew Catherine Brennan was having a hard time, but nobody offered to help." "That is not fair, Thomas," someone shouted from the back. "We all have our own troubles to deal with." "Exactly. When it was too much trouble, you all turned a blind eye. But now that someone else is handling it, you are all suddenly experts on what is best for two children you ignored 6 weeks ago." Mr. Pembroke raised a hand. "Mr. Hale, your feelings are understandable, but it does not change the fact that these girls need a proper home. A home with a married couple, or at least a woman who can give them the guidance they need." "And I suppose you have a family all lined up," Thomas challenged. Pembroke shifted on his feet. "Not right here, no. But there are places in Helena where they will be separated, not always. Do not lie to me. I know exactly how those places work. They will split them up by age. They were fixing to send those girls to different homes, see? And that promise Clara made to her dying mama, to stay together, would just get swallowed up by paperwork." Margaret Whitmore's face was as hard as a West Texas drought. "Mr. Hale," she said, "your soft spot for these children is sweet, but let's be honest. You are a single man, alone, way out here, with no experience raising kids. And you have a history of, well, a tragedy that might be clouding your mind. The air in that church went dead quiet." Thomas felt a cold anger rise up in him. He knew she was talking about his own little girl. "I am just stating the facts," she went on. "It has been 5 years since your wife left you. You live like a hermit. Now all of a sudden you want 2 little girls? It makes a person wonder." "Wonder what?" Thomas's voice was low and dangerous. "About your reasons. Are you trying to help them? Or are you just trying to replace what you lost?" A low murmur went through the pews. The Reverend tried to step in, but Margaret kept on. "We cannot ignore it. He lost a daughter, and now he has found 2 more. That is not healthy for anyone." Thomas took 1 step forward, and that was all it took. A couple of fellas stood up, thinking things were about to get ugly. He stopped and made himself breathe. "You want to talk about my reasons? Fine. I took those girls in because they were freezing and had nowhere else to go. That is the whole story. It is not complicated, and it sure as heck is not your business. The welfare of children is everybody's business, Mr. Pembroke chimed in, looking all official. Then where were all of you 6 weeks ago? Thomas shot back. Where was the welfare office when they were lost in a blizzard? We did not know about them then, but you know now, and now you want to rip them out of the only decent home they have had in years. You want to send them off to some place where they will be just a number on a page. Mayor Dalton shifted in his seat. Thomas, nobody wants that. You're just trying to cover your hides, Thomas said, cutting him right off. You want to make sure that if anything goes wrong, you can say you followed all the proper rules. But those girls are not a problem to be handled. They are little people who deserve a whole lot better than this. Mr. Hale, Pembroke said, his patience worn clean through. Feelings aside, the law is clear. A single man is not proper guardianship. The welfare office has the right to remove children from a home that is not suitable. Then you will have to remove me with them. The words just hung there in the quiet room. You could see folks trying to figure out what he meant. I do not understand, Pembroke said. If you take those girls, I am going with them. I am not letting them face that alone. You will have to drag me out of my own home, and I promise you, it will not be quiet. Margaret looked like she had seen a ghost. Are you threatening us? I'm stating facts, just like you were. Thomas looked around that room, meeting every eye. Those girls showed up on my doorstep with nothing. No family, no home, and no hope left. I gave them a roof over their heads. I gave them warm food and a place where they belonged. And you want to take that away because it does not look proper to you? It is not about what is proper, Pembroke started. It is about protecting them. From what? A man who has kept them safe and warm? Or from the gossip of people who care more about appearances than about two little girls? Appearances matter, Margaret snapped. What kind of message does this send if we allow it? The message it sends, said a voice from the back of the church, is that people matter more than rules. Everyone turned around. Standing there was Eleanor Brooks, a woman Thomas had seen around town but never really spoken to. She was in her 50s, a widow who pretty much kept to herself. She walked right down that center aisle, shoulders back and her gaze steady as a rock. When she got to the front, she turned to face everyone. I know most of you do not know me well, Eleanor said. I do not go to your quilting bees or your potlucks, but I have lived here for 30 years, and I know when this town is fixing to make a terrible mistake. Mrs. Brooks, the mayor said, not sure what to do. This does not concern you. It concerns every last one of us, because this is not really about what is best for those children. It is about control. It is about making sure everyone fits into your neat little boxes so nobody feels uncomfortable. Margaret's face turned beet red. That is ridiculous. We are just following the guidelines. Guidelines written by people who have never had to choose between following a rule and doing the right thing. Eleanor then turned to Mr. Pembroke. You say Thomas Hale is not suitable because he is a single man. But has anyone here bothered to ask if those girls are fed, if they are warm, if they feel safe? Has a single one of you even gone out there to check their well-being? Or is everyone just figuring that because it doesn't look right, it must not be right? Reverend Michaels cleared his throat. I've been visiting every week just like I was asked. Those girls are cared for just fine. They are healthy, dressed proper, and seem right at home with Mr. Hale. But being comfortable is not the only thing to consider, Pembroke argued. There are matters of their development, their schooling, their place in the community, all of which can be handled without ripping these children from a steady home, Eleanor interrupted. Now, here is what I propose. I will move into Thomas Hale's house as a live-in housekeeper and chaperone. That will satisfy your need for a woman's supervision and decency. The girls stay together, in a home where they are wanted, and this town can quit its worrying. Murmurs filled the church. Thomas just stared at Eleanor Brooks, caught completely off guard. Mrs. Brooks, he said slowly, you do not have to do that. I know I do not have to. I am choosing to. Just like you chose to help those girls when no one else would. She looked right at him. Unless, of course, you are against the idea. Thomas's mind was racing. Having someone else in his house, in his space, would break the quiet he had kept for 5 long years. Every part of him wanted to say no. But then he looked at Eleanor's steady eyes and saw something he knew well, a resolve that comes from being judged by folks who do not understand. I am not against it, he said quietly. Margaret sputtered. Well, this is just not proper. More improper than sending 2 little girls to some crowded institution, Eleanor shot back. More improper than splitting up sisters who have already lost everything? I do not think so. Mr. Pembroke took off his glasses, wiped them, and put them back on. Mrs. Brooks, I appreciate your offer, but this is a serious decision. You would be taking on a whole heap of responsibility. I am well aware. I have raised 3 of my own children and buried 2 of them. I know what responsibility feels like. Her voice got a little softer. I also know what loss feels like. And I know that sometimes the right thing to do does not come wrapped up in a nice, tidy bow. The agent from the territory looked at the mayor, who looked at Margaret, who looked like she had just bit into a lemon. The silence in the room stretched out. Finally, Pembroke sighed. If Mrs. Brooks is willing to supervise, and Reverend Michaels keeps up his weekly visits, and if the girls show no signs of trouble, then I suppose the welfare office could approve this, but only on a trial basis. A trial? Thomas demanded. For 6 months. After that, we will look at the situation again and decide if you can be their permanent guardian. It was not perfect, but it was a long way from the alternative. Thomas glanced at Eleanor, who gave him a small nod. Fine, he said. 6 months. But Margaret was not ready to give in. This is a mistake. You are all going to be sorry. When, Margaret? Eleanor turned to her. When those girls grow up healthy and happy because someone actually gave a damn about them instead of just appearances? When they get a shot at a real life instead of being warehoused? Tell me, what part of that will we be sorry for? Margaret had no answer. She just gathered her skirts and marched right out of the church with some of her followers behind her. The rest of the townspeople started to leave, most looking uneasy, a few looking pleased, but all of them ready for the show to be over. Mr. Pembroke walked over to Thomas and Eleanor. I will need to file the paperwork with the territorial office. Expect an official visit in a few weeks to check on the living arrangements. Fine, Thomas said, cutting him short. After the agent left, it was just Thomas, Eleanor, and Reverend Michaels in the empty church. That was quite a thing to see, the Reverend said softly. Mrs. Brooks, your offer was very kind. It was necessary, Eleanor corrected him. I will not stand by while this town tears apart something good just because it makes them uncomfortable. Thomas finally found his words. Why? You do not know me. You do not owe me or those girls a single thing. Eleanor's face softened. I know what it is like to be the outsider. My husband drank himself into an early grave, and half this town acted like it was my fault for not being a better wife. When my children took sick with scarlet fever, people whispered it was my punishment. I learned real quick that this town's kindness has its limits, and those limits are all about fitting in. I am sorry, Thomas said. The words felt small, but he meant them. Do not be sorry. Just let me help. I have a little house I rent out so I can afford to do this. And to be honest, she gave a small smile. I am tired of living by myself with nothing but my own thoughts. Maybe this arrangement can do us all some good. Thomas did not know what to say. This woman had just turned her life upside down for 2 little girls she had never met, and a man she barely knew, all because it was the right thing. Thank you, he finally said. Do not thank me yet. Wait and see if you can stand having me around. Eleanor straightened her shawl. I will need a couple of days to get my things in order. How about Saturday? Saturday, Thomas agreed, still feeling a bit stunned. After Eleanor left, the Reverend spoke. You made a powerful enemy tonight. Margaret Whitmore does not forget things like this. I have had enemies before. Still, you be careful. This is not over. Thomas looked up at the altar and the cross. It never is. He rode home in the dark, his mind churning. Just when he thought he had found a routine, everything had changed. Now Eleanor Brooks would be in his house, officials would be checking on them, and the whole town would be watching. When he got back to the ranch, he saw both girls sitting on the porch steps, wrapped in blankets against the cold. They were waiting for him. "Well?" Clara asked as soon as he got off his horse. Thomas walked up the steps and sat down with them. He told them everything that happened. He told them about the arguments, about Eleanor's surprising offer, and the 6-month trial. When he was done, Clara was quiet for a good while. "So, folks really do not want us here, do they? Folks do not know what they want. They just get scared of anything different. Are you scared of us being here?" Thomas looked at her, and at Elise huddled next to her sister. He looked at these two small girls who had shattered his quiet life and dragged him back into the world. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but it is not because of you. It is because I am afraid of—" He stopped, not sure how to say it. "Of losing us?" Elise asked in a small voice. The words hit him hard. Yes, that was it exactly. He had lost his Sarah and his Elizabeth, and everything that ever mattered. Letting these girls into his heart meant risking that kind of pain all over again. "Yes," he said, his voice thick. Clara reached out and took his big, rough hand. The gesture was so trusting it made his throat tighten up. "You will not lose us," she said with certainty. "We are not going anywhere. You said we were home, remember?" He had said that. It had just slipped out that day at the Reverend's office. But now he knew it was the truest thing he had said in years. Home. Thomas had said it to soothe her, but to Clara, it was a solid promise. "I remember," Thomas said. "Then that is all that matters. Everything else is just talk. Just talk." Thomas wished it was that easy. But sitting on the porch together, the three of them braced for whatever was next. He figured Clara might be smarter than he gave her credit for. Saturday rolled in with a spring rain that turned the roads to pure slop, making the whole world smell fresh and new. Thomas watched from the porch as a wagon sloshed toward them. It carried Eleanor Brooks and a pile of belongings covered in oilcloth. Behind him, Clara and Elise peeked out the door, a mix of nerves and curiosity. "What if she does not like us?" Elise whispered. "She chose to come," Clara said, "so she must like us some." Thomas was not so sure. Eleanor had made a big stand at the town meeting, but that did not mean she wanted to live with a quiet rancher and 2 orphans. People say things in the heat of the moment. But when Eleanor climbed down, her face was calm and steady. She looked over the house and the muddy yard, nodding like she saw just what she expected. "Well," she said, "I have seen worse." Thomas almost cracked a smile. That was high praise indeed. "I deal in the truth, Mr. Hale, not sweet talk." She then turned to the girls. "You must be Clara and Elise. I am Eleanor Brooks. I am here to make sure this whole setup is proper enough for the authorities. They seem to think young ones need more than just a roof and food." Her dry wit made Clara smile a little. "Nice to meet you, Mrs. Brooks." "We will see about that after a week," Eleanor replied. "I am told I am mighty particular." She nodded toward the wagon. "Now, I have likely brought too much, but I was not sure what you had. Mr. Hale, I would be grateful for your help." They spent the next hour hauling her things inside. She brought clothes, books, kitchen gear, and even a small rocking chair. Thomas cleared a corner in the main room for her, but she insisted the girls keep the bedroom. She said a cot and a privacy screen would do just fine for her. "I have slept in worse places," she said when Thomas argued. "Besides, I am a light sleeper. This way I can keep the fire going all night." As they worked, Thomas watched her with a growing respect. She moved through the house with a quiet purpose, taking stock of the place without overstepping. In the kitchen, her sharp eyes missed nothing. "You keep a good pantry," she finally said. "Better than I figured for a man on his own." Thomas just nodded. "The girls need to eat," he managed. She looked at him straight. "And you've fed them well. I see it in their faces. They're filling out, getting some life back in them. You've done a good thing here, Mr. Hale." At supper that night, the stew she made was rich and hearty. It felt something like a family. though no one dared say it. "Tell me about your days," Eleanor asked the girls. Clara spoke up, saying they did chores and that she was teaching her little sister to read. "Mama taught me," she said proudly. "Said learning was the one thing no one could ever take from you." A soft look came over Eleanor's face. "Your mother was a wise woman. And you, Elise? Do you like your lessons?" The little girl gave a shy nod. "Clara is a good teacher. She don't hit you with a ruler like the old schoolmaster did." Eleanor's voice went cold as a blue norther. "Well, there will be none of that here. A person should learn because they want to, not because they're scared." In the days that followed, Eleanor brought a gentle order to the house. She fixed clothes, planned a spring garden, and gave the days a rhythm they'd been missing. More than that, she brought talk. She had an opinion on politicians, merchants, and neighbors, and wasn't afraid to share it. She even drew Thomas into conversations about the ranch, discussions he found he actually liked. "You're smarter than you let on," she told him one evening. "You hide in that quiet, but I can see you thinking." Thomas kept his hands busy fixing the leather harness. "Talking never did me much good. Maybe you just ain't found the right folks to listen," she replied, her needle moving steady on a quilt. "Your wife, Elizabeth. Did she listen?" Thomas froze. "How do you know that name? It's a small town." "Folks talk. I know she left you after your little girl passed. I know you've been alone since. Then you know all you need to." "I wonder," she said softly. "Or have you just buried it all so deep you can pretend it's not there?" He set down the harness, his jaw tight. "That ain't your business, Mrs. Brooks. It is if it's affecting these girls. They don't need to lose another man to a grief that won't mend. I am not their parent. You feed 'em, you shelter 'em, and you worry over 'em. What else is there?" Thomas stood up sharp and walked out into the cool night air. When he came back inside an hour later, she was waiting. "I apologize," she said. "I pushed too hard. It's a weakness of mine. I see a problem, and I just charge right at it." He sat down heavy in his chair. "You're not wrong. I just don't know what to do about it. Healing isn't about forgetting," she said gently. "It's about learning to carry the weight so it don't crush you." The fire popped and hissed in the silence. "Sarah was 6, Thomas finally said, his voice thick. "She got sick so fast. One day she was fine, the next she was burning up. 3 days later she was gone. Elizabeth, she blamed me, or maybe herself. Either way she left. I lost 'em both. And then these 2 girls showed up and ruined everything." "Ruined it how?" "Made me care again. And that's a bad thing? It is when you know how much it hurts to lose someone." Eleanor's eyes held a deep sadness. "My youngest son was 8 when the fever took him. My daughter was 10. My husband just gave up on a world without them. I understand being afraid. But if you hide from the pain, you hide from the joy, too. You can't have one without the other." Thomas looked at her, really looked at her. "Is that why you're here? Because you saw 3 people too scared to admit they needed each other?" She gave a small smile. "I thought I might help build a bridge." A rusty, unused laugh escaped Thomas's lips. "Well now," Eleanor's smile widened. "That wasn't so hard, was it?" That Sunday, Eleanor walked the girls to church. When they got back, Clara was fighting tears. "What is it?" Thomas asked. "Mrs. Whitmore," Eleanor said, her voice tight with anger. "She made some ugly comments about our household." Clara's chin trembled. "She said we were living in sin. She said it loud for everyone to hear. And when I spoke to her," Eleanor added, "she claimed she was just speaking the truth in love." "It wasn't love," Elise whispered. "It was just mean." Thomas was already grabbing his coat. "I'm going to town." Eleanor caught his arm. "Thomas, no. That's what she wants. You'll just prove her right." The rage was choking him, but he knew she was right. "So we do nothing?" "For now," she said. "We take the high road. We show her she's wrong by living right." He looked at the girls. "I'm sorry you had to hear such poison." "It ain't your fault," Clara said, showing a wisdom beyond her years. "Mama always said, hurt people try to hurt people, because it gives them a feeling of power. Margaret Whitmore is that kind of person." The weeks that followed were hard. Margaret's words had given courage to others who thought like her. The girls would come home from church with stories of whispers and hard stares. Some children they had made friends with were now told to stay away. The shopkeepers were polite, but kept their distance. Yet small kindnesses started showing up. Old Mrs. Hutchkins, who had turned them away before, brought by a basket of preserves and a short apology. "I was wrong," she said. "These are for the girls." Bill Crawford at the store started adding extra things to their orders, like candy or a new blanket, claiming he had too much stock. And having Eleanor there made a real difference. She was respected in town, and her word meant something. When Margaret tried to stir up more trouble, Eleanor faced her right on the main street for all to hear. "Margaret, I have been living with Mr. Hale and those girls for a month now. I have seen how he cares for them. They are doing just fine. Whatever story you are trying to sell, it is not the truth. You claim to care about children, but I think you care more about being right than what is best for Clara and Elise." That showdown became a town legend. Folks took sides, but Eleanor's plain talk shifted things. The pressure did not vanish, but it let up. Then the official man came. Mr. Pembroke showed up one Tuesday morning without warning. He interviewed them all one by one. He looked through the house, checked their food, and made notes in a little book. Thomas hated it, feeling like he had to prove himself to a stranger. When Pembroke was done, he gathered them all. "I have finished my review," he said. "The living conditions are fine. The children seem well. Mrs. Brooks' presence solves the earlier problems." Thomas braced himself for the catch. "However," Pembroke went on, "there are still issues. Mr. Hale, you have no legal claim to these girls. What happens if you decide this is too much? What if Mrs. Brooks leaves?" "I will not leave," Eleanor stated flatly. "With respect, ma'am, you cannot promise that," Pembroke said. "Things change." "I'm not leaving these girls," Thomas said. "Your heart is in the right place, but good intentions are not law. I am recommending that official guardianship papers be drawn up. It will give you legal rights and give the girls security." Thomas had not thought about courts and papers. He had just wanted to provide a home. "What does that take?" he asked. "Court hearings, witnesses, and a deeper look into your past. It is not simple, but it is the only way to make sure no one can take these children from you later." Clara's small hand slipped into Thomas's. He looked down at the trust in her eyes. It was a promise he had to keep, no matter the cost. The weight of it all settled on him. Legal guardianship. That meant forever. A piece of paper declaring these girls were his to raise and his to keep safe. The thought scared him something fierce, but it also felt right. "All right then, let's get it started," he said. After the lawyer left, the house was quiet as a tomb. Eleanor poured some tea. "Are you sure about this, Thomas?" she asked. "This is for good. There is no turning back." He was sure, even knowing the responsibility it carried. Thomas looked over at the girls. Clara held his gaze, but little Elise was biting her lip, her worry plain as day. "What is it, Elise?" he asked softly. "What if you change your mind? What if we are too much trouble and you wish we had never come?" Her question just about broke his heart. He knelt to look her in the eye. "Listen to me, you two. When you turned up in my barn, you scared the daylights out of me. Not because of who you were, but because for 5 years I made sure I did not care about a single soul. I figured if I did not care, I could not get hurt." He took a breath. "But you two made me care anyway. You reminded me that life is not about hiding from the pain. It is about finding folks who are worth the risk of it. And you are worth that risk." Clara's eyes were glassy with tears she refused to let fall. "You really mean that?" "I mean every word. You are not going anywhere. You are home. I will say it until you believe it." With a cry, Elise threw her little arms around his neck. Thomas held her tight as she sobbed into his shoulder. Clara came right after, and soon he was tangled up in a hug with the two girls, feeling things he swore he would never feel again. He saw Eleanor watching, tears on her own cheeks. She gave him a little nod, and Thomas knew what she was saying. You did it. You let yourself love again." He nodded back, a silent thank you filled with a glimmer of hope. That night, with the girls asleep, Thomas sat on the porch. He thought about the long road that brought them to this place. 2 little girls lost in a blizzard. A man who had given up, finding a reason to keep going. A woman who chose kindness over an easy life. They were not a perfect family, not by a long shot. But they were a real one. And Thomas would fight a bear for them. Inside, he could hear Eleanor humming. In the other room, Clara was reading to Elise. The sounds of a family. Thomas went inside, closing the door on the dark and the cold. There were more fights to come. Margaret Whitmore was not giving up, and the court business would be rough. But they would face it together. This little family, built out of desperation and pure stubbornness. And that, Thomas reckoned, was more than enough. Spring came on strong, painting the land in every shade of green. The little garden Eleanor and the girls planted began to sprout, a sight that reminded Thomas of the girls themselves. They looked fragile, but they were tougher than anyone gave them credit for. The court date was set for late May. Eleanor helped him gather up all the paperwork, proof he owned the land and had the money to support the girls. The preacher and a few other folks from town agreed to speak for him. But Margaret Whitmore had been busy too. The talk around town was she had hired some fancy lawyer from Helena. She was digging up dirt and convincing powerful families that Thomas was unfit to raise children. "Let her try," Eleanor said. "We have the truth on our side. That has got to count for something." "Does it?" Thomas wondered. "In a courtroom where folks have already made up their minds?" "It does," she said firmly. "When the judge sees 2 happy, healthy children who love you." He wanted to believe her, but as the day got closer, a knot of worry tightened in his stomach. He saw how Clara was laughing more, how Elise did not jump at loud noises anymore. He had given them that safety, and the thought of it being ripped away made him sick. The night before the hearing, Thomas could not sleep. He sat by the fire, thinking of what he would do if the judge said no. "You are borrowing trouble from tomorrow," Eleanor's voice came from her room. "I can hear you thinking all the way over here." "I thought you were asleep." "How could I sleep with you worrying loud enough to wake the dead?" She came out in her robe and sat across from him. "Talk to me." "There is nothing to talk about. Tomorrow the judge makes his choice, and that is that." "And you are sure he will choose against you?" "I am convinced that Margaret Whitmore is a force of nature, and she has money and friends I will never have. She is a master at making folks see the world her way." Eleanor was silent for a spell. "Do you have any idea why she is doing this? It is not truly about the girls." "What are you talking about?" "Margaret's son died in the war, and her husband drank himself to death from the grief. She never got over losing them, so she tries to control every person and everything she can. You are something she cannot control. You are a man who made up his own mind about his life without her approval. That is the real reason for all this. So she is ruining 2 little girls' lives just for spite. No, she is ruining them because she honestly believes she is right. That is what is so dangerous about her. She thinks she is saving those girls from you." Thomas rubbed his tired face. "How can I possibly fight that? By being the man you are. By speaking the plain truth. By trusting the judge can see the reality behind all the fancy words." Eleanor leaned in close. "Thomas, I have watched you with those girls. I have seen the change in you. You were so set on not letting yourself care, certain it would break you. But you let them into your heart anyway. You chose love when it was not safe. That takes more grit than Margaret Whitmore could ever imagine. What if it is not enough? Then we will face that together. But I do not think it will come to that." Thomas wanted to believe her, but all he could hear was Clara's small voice from that first night. "Our mama is gone. We have nowhere else to go." He had given them a place to go, a place to be, a place to call home. The thought of that being torn away felt like breaking a sacred promise. The morning sun came up far too soon. Thomas, Eleanor, and the girls put on their best clothes. It was not much to look at, but they appeared respectable. Clara had braided Elise's hair and her own, and they both wore the new dresses Eleanor had made. They looked like what they had become, children who were looked after, who were loved, and who had found some peace after so much turmoil. The courthouse in Greystone was the biggest building in town. It was a two-story building that served as the courtroom, town hall, and meeting place all in one. When they walked in, the place was already packed. Thomas saw Margaret Whitmore surrounded by her supporters and her slick lawyer looking far too confident. He saw the townspeople who came just to watch the show. But he also saw friends who came to stand by them. Bill Crawford and his wife were there. Mrs. Hutchkins was leaning on her cane. A few other families who had shown their support were there too, along with Reverend Michaels, who looked nervous but firm. "Quite a crowd," Eleanor whispered. "They always love a good spectacle. Well, let us give them one they will not forget." The judge was a man named Harlow Pierce, brought in from Helena just for this case. He was in his 60s with steel-gray hair and eyes that looked like they had seen every foolish thing a person could do and were not impressed by any of it. He took his seat at the bench and scanned the room like a man who would rather be fishing. He announced, "This is a hearing to decide if Thomas Hale is a suitable legal guardian for Clara and Elise Brennan. I have read the first reports. Now I want to hear from everyone involved. Mrs. Whitmore, I believe you are the one who objected." Margaret stood, smoothing down her expensive dress. "Yes, Your Honor. Myself and other concerned citizens feel that Mr. Hale's home is not a proper place for young girls." "On what basis?" "On the basis that Mr. Hale is a single man who knows nothing about raising children. He has lived alone for years after a personal tragedy that makes us question his good sense. These girls need a real family with a husband and wife who can raise them right." "And you have a family like that ready to take them?" Margaret paused for just a second. "Not right here in Greystone, but there are good choices in Helena. Choices that might split the girls up, I imagine. Mrs. Whitmore, I have read your report. You suggested placing them in an orphanage, did you not?" She answered, "As a short-term solution until good homes can be found, yes." "Short-term," Judge Pierce repeated, his voice as dry as dust. "In my time, short-term stays in crowded places have a way of becoming permanent. But we can talk about that later. Mr. Hale, will you please come forward?" Thomas got to his feet, his heart hammering in his chest. He walked to the front of the room, feeling every single stare on his back. "Tell me about the night you found these girls," the judge said. Thomas told the whole story. He talked about the storm, the barn, and the two little girls huddled in the hay. He told him about Clara's simple words that their mother was gone. He explained how he decided to give them shelter for just one night, and how that one night turned into forever. "Why did you not bring them into town right away?" the judge asked. "It was late and the storm was getting worse. They were just worn out. It felt wrong to make them walk another 4 miles in that mess." "And when the storm was over?" Thomas paused. "I took them to see Reverend Michaels. I asked him what I should do. He mentioned the orphanage in Helena. I told him they would stay with me instead." Why? It was the same question Thomas had asked himself over and over. Why did he make that choice? Why did he take on a burden he never wanted for children he did not know? "Because nobody else was going to," he finally said. "Because I looked at those little girls and I saw exactly what would happen to them. They would be split up, sent to an institution and forgotten. I could not stand by and let that happen." "Even though you had no duty to them?" "Duty had nothing to do with it. It was simply the right thing to do." Judge Pierce wrote something down. "Mrs. Brooks, you are living at Mr. Hale's home now, correct?" Eleanor stood up. "Yes, Your Honor. I moved in 2 months ago to be a female presence and to quiet any concerns about the arrangement. And what have you seen in that time?" "I have seen a man who makes sure those girls get 3 meals every day. He keeps them warm and clothed and teaches them things they will need to know. I have seen two children who were skin and bones and scared of their own shadows when they came. Now they are healthy and happy. I have seen a home that runs on respect and kindness, not on rules and fear. You sound like you're on his side, Mrs. Brooks. I am on his side. I am speaking up for common sense instead of red tape, for what is real over what people might think. I am speaking for what is truly best for these children, not what just looks good on a piece of paper. A low murmur went through the room. Judge Pierce's face did not change, but Thomas thought he saw a hint of approval in his eyes. Reverend Michaels, you have been visiting each week. What is your opinion? The Reverend stood, looking uneasy in the spotlight. Your Honor, I had my doubts at first. I had some of the same worries that Mrs. Whitmore brought up. But over these last 4 months, I have watched this group become a real family. Mr. Hale might not do things the usual way, but he is giving those girls exactly what they need. A steady home, safety, and someone who truly cares for them. Have you seen anything improper? Not a single thing. The living situation is proper. The girls are watched over, and there is real affection between them and Mr. Hale. Margaret's lawyer stood up. Your Honor, affection is not the point. The point is whether a single man, no matter how good his heart is, can provide the right kind of home for these girls to grow into proper young ladies. Define proper, Judge Pierce said flatly. The lawyer blinked. I am sorry. You used the word proper twice. I want to know what you mean by it. Well, proper moral teaching, a proper female role model, and proper training for their future as wives and mothers. Mrs. Brooks is a female role model, the judge cut in. They go to church, which takes care of moral teaching. As for their future roles, that seems a bit early, seeing as one is 9 and the other is 7. What else you got? The lawyer was flustered. It is about the whole picture, Your Honor, how the situation looks. I am not interested in how things look. I'm interested in facts. Do these girls have enough food, a roof over their heads, and clothes on their back? Yes, but are they getting an education? In a way, but there is no real school. There is no school close enough, Eleanor spoke up. I have been teaching them. Clara can read and write better than most children her age, and Elise is learning fast. Judge Pierce looked back at his notes. I would like to speak with the girls now. Clara and Elise, please come forward. Thomas felt Clara's little hand find his as she walked by. She looked up at him with worried eyes. He gave her a small nod that he hoped looked brave. They stood before the judge, looking small but standing tall. Judge Pierce looked at them for a long moment. Clara, you are 9 years old, is that right? Yes, sir. Tell me about living with Mr. Hale. Clara glanced at Thomas, then looked the judge right in the eye. He saved our lives, sir. When our mama passed, we had nowhere to go. He took us in. He has fed us and given us a home. He acts tough, but he is kind. He is teaching us things, and he has never made us feel like a burden. You are not a burden, Thomas said under his breath. The judge raised a hand. Clara, why would you think you are a burden? Because we eat his food and take up his time, and we cannot pay him back. But he says just being there is enough. Her voice shook just a little. I do not want to leave. We are happy here. We are safe. Is not that what is important? It is a big part of it. Elise, what about you? The little girl nodded hard. He is nice. He carved me a horse. He lets me help with the chickens. And he does not get mad when I mess up. And Eleanor tells us stories, and we have a real bed. She stopped, tears spilling down her cheeks. Please do not make us leave, please. The courtroom was dead silent. Thomas saw Clara was crying now, too. Both girls were trying so hard to be brave while begging to keep the only home they had ever known. The judge's face softened just a touch. Nobody is making any choices just yet, child. You can go back to your seats. The girls came back to him, and he put an arm around each of them, not caring what anybody thought. They were shaking, and he was filled with a cold fury that they had to plead their case to a room full of strangers. Margaret's lawyer called up folks who talked about how Thomas kept to himself, lost in his own grief. They were not mean-spirited, just people who thought their way was the only way. Then Margaret took the stand. "Mrs. Whitmore," the judge said, "you seem to have a strong interest in this. Why is that?" "Because those girls deserve better. A proper family, a proper raising, things an old ranch cannot give them." "What sort of things?" "Education, culture, a chance at a good marriage." "They are 9 and 7, the judge said flatly. "Marriage seems a long way off." "Well," she replied, "it is never too early to prepare. I must be frank with you. I have been doing this work for 20 years. I have seen plenty of children in tough spots. I have seen them in orphanages and with guardians who took them in for all sorts of reasons. What I have learned is that children do not need a perfect future all planned out. They need someone who cares if they wake up in the morning, someone to feed them, comfort them, and fight for them. Can you sit there and tell me an orphanage will do that better than where they are now?" Margaret's face turned red. "Your Honor, you are oversimplifying things. Answer my question. Will those girls be better off in an institution?" The room was quiet. Finally, Margaret said, "They would be better off with a real family. But you do not have one of those waiting, do you? So I will ask again, will they be better off in an institution?" "Maybe in the long run," she mumbled. "That is not an answer." Margaret lost her calm. "I am trying to do what is right. Mr. Hale lost a child before. What happens when it all happens again? What happens when his sorrow takes over and those girls are the ones who pay for it?" Thomas got to his feet. "Your Honor, mind if I have my say?" Judge Pierce nodded. Thomas looked Margaret right in the eye. "You are right about one thing. I lost a child, my daughter Sarah, and losing her almost ended me. For 5 long years I hid from everyone because I could not handle the pain. But then these 2 girls showed up and they needed help. So I helped them. And yes, I am terrified every single day that something bad will happen to them. But being afraid does not make me a bad guardian. It makes me a good one. Because I know just how precious they are, and I choose to love them anyway." His voice grew thick with emotion. "You lost people too, Margaret. I know that kind of hurt, but you are using your pain to try and ruin the happiness of others. These girls are not here to replace my Sarah. They are Clara and Elise, and I would be honored to be part of their future." Margaret was crying now, but her tears were angry. "How dare you?" she choked out. "You know nothing about what I have been through. You are right, I do not. But I know what those girls have been through. They deserve better than to be used as pawns in your own private sorrow." Judge Pierce rapped his gavel. "That is enough. Mrs. Whitmore, you can step down. Does anyone else want to speak?" Bill Crawford stood up. "I would like to say something, Your Honor." "Go ahead." Crawford walked to the front, looking uncomfortable but sure of himself. "I have known Thomas Hale for 15 years. He is a good man who went through a terrible time and came out the other side a lonely man. When those girls appeared, he could have turned them away. No one would have said a word, but he did not. He took them in, and he has done right by them. To be frank, this whole hearing is a waste of good daylight. Anyone can see those girls are doing just fine. They should stay with the man who saved them." After him, others stood up. Mrs. Hutchkins spoke about Thomas's success. Ranch families who had seen the girls in town talked about how much they had changed for the better. Even some of Margaret's own friends shifted in their seats, looking like they had backed the wrong horse. Finally, Judge Pierce held up a hand. "I have heard all I need to. I'm going to take a short break to think on this." The waiting was pure agony. Thomas sat with the girls, nobody saying a word. Clara held his hand so tight his fingers went numb, but he did not pull away. When Judge Pierce returned, his face gave nothing away. "I have considered all the testimony and reviewed the documents. This is my decision. I am granting Thomas Hale full legal guardianship of Clara and Elise Brennan, starting immediately. There is one condition, that Mrs. Eleanor Brooks must remain in the home for at least 1 more year to help out." The courtroom buzzed with noise. Thomas heard the words, but they did not seem real. The girls were his. Clara was laughing and crying at the same time, and Elise threw her arms around his neck. Judge Pierce was not finished. He looked at Margaret. "Ma'am, I understand you believe you are doing the right thing, but your belief is not based on facts. These girls are clearly better off with Mr. Hale. I suggest you use your energy to help children who are actually in trouble, instead of trying to fix something that is not broken." Margaret stood up and walked straight out of the courtroom without a word. Her supporters followed her out. The judge looked at Thomas. "Mr. Hale, you have taken on a big responsibility. These girls will need a lot of support. Are you prepared for that?" Thomas looked at Clara and Elise, the two souls who had wandered into his life and changed everything. "Yes, Your Honor. I am prepared." "Then this court finds in your favor. Congratulations." That judge's gavel hitting the wood sounded like pure freedom. Outside the courthouse, folks gathered around, but Thomas could barely hear their congratulations. The girls belonged with him, for good. Eleanor finally shooed everyone away, giving them room to breathe. The wagon ride back to the ranch was quiet. In the back, the girls held hands, trying to hide their little smiles. Eleanor sat beside Thomas, a look of satisfaction on her face. "You handled yourself well in there," she said softly. "All I did was tell the truth." When they got home, the setting sun was painting the big sky orange and pink. Clara looked up at him. "Mr. Hale," she started, then smiled. "Thomas, thank you for sticking by us." Later that night, Thomas went to his workshop. He came back carrying something he'd been whittling on for weeks. It was a small wooden carving of two pairs of boots, one bigger than the other, both of them looking worn but tough. "What is it?" Elise asked. "A reminder," Thomas answered. He hung it right over the fireplace. "Of the night two little girls brought a home back to me." Clara looked at the carving with eyes that seemed way too old for her years. "You saved us." "No," Thomas said, shaking his head. "We all saved each other." In that moment, he finally understood what Eleanor had been telling him all along. Healing did not mean you had to forget. It meant you learned to carry the hurt without letting it break you. It meant choosing to hope again. The ache for his Sarah and Elizabeth would always be there, a part of him. But now something new was growing right alongside it. There was Clara's quick mind, Elise's gentle heart, and the steady, surprising friendship of Eleanor. The girls were not replacing what he lost. They were adding to the man he was. The seasons turned and the garden grew, and the girls grew right along with it. Thomas taught them how to ride and rope, the basics of ranch life. Eleanor taught them how to sew and run a proper household. The four of them just fit. It was not a typical family, but it was theirs, and it was real. One evening, as the first snow started to fall, he stood on the porch watching the girls build a snowman. Eleanor came and stood beside him. "They are good girls." "They sure are," he said. "You are a good father to them." Thomas looked at her, stunned by the word. "Father?" "Well, what else would you call it?" she asked. "You feed them, teach them, and worry over them. That is what fathers do." The word felt huge, but it also felt right. "I never figured I would get another chance at this," he admitted. The girls called for them to come help, so they went down and built the most crooked, lopsided, perfect snowman Montana had ever seen. That night by the fire, he thought about how much had changed since two half-frozen children stumbled into his barn. He had told them they were home then, never guessing how true it would be. They had not just found a home with him. The four of them had built one together, using the broken pieces of what they had all lost. Outside, the snow covered the world in white, but inside the fire burned bright, and the house was filled with the quiet breathing of people who were safe. Thomas Hale had once believed his life was over. He finally understood it had just been waiting to start. The girls were home. Eleanor was home. And for the first time in 5 long years, so was he. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community.